there. Welcome to Mighty Finsights. This is Rory, Holland, and I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend James Furbush, the Vice President of Marketing at AccessOne. James is always lots of fun, so I think we're going to have a interesting and fun conversation. First and foremost, what part of the country are you in, James?
What's up, everybody? Rory, how are you? Don't put too much pressure on me. I am in the Boston area. I am probably about an hour outside the city, but a proud New Englander, Northeasterner, for good or bad, I
Yeah, we were
suppose.
we were talking a little bit about the Orange team in your neck of the woods, Syracuse. That's where
hmm
you went to school, right?
I did. Yeah, I did my undergrad at Syracuse and got a master's at Emerson. So I have a master's in journalism from Emerson, and I did do my undergrad at Syracuse. And Syracuse is probably the one place where it's colder and more snowy than it is in kind of Boston and New England. So I managed to survive it and get out of there in one piece.
Yeah, we're experiencing a little bit of who knows when folks will listen to this podcast. We'll release it in a couple months. It'll be springtime by then. But it's winter here in Texas, so 17 degrees. You notice I've got my coat on, so staying warm even though we're indoors. My blood has definitely gotten thin from my days in Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah, I've actually, it's funny. I've gone sort of the other way, which is for the longest time, I was not a winter person. Because like growing up for me, winter was just shoveling sidewalks and snow. My family, I probably one of the few New Englanders who grew up, we did not ski. I really didn't know anybody who did ski. The town I grew up in, it was a lot of middle to lower middle income people, a lot of kids that I grew up with, divorced parents, and they kind of basically raised themselves. And so winter was like not enjoyable for me growing up, but now I've sort of started to get into it a little bit more, just like trying to, find that sort of joy in the winter season. So I love it. I went running this morning. It's about 20 degrees, 15 degrees today, and I got out for a good run outside and just absolutely love the winter now.
That's great to hear because you're stuck with it this time of year.
I'm stuck with it. Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's like you can keep like smashing your face against the fact like I hate winter, and then you realize, well, I'm never leaving from this place, and there's always going to be winter. So it's like, what do you do to sort of enjoy and make the most of the 3-4 months out of the year when it is that way? And I finally this year had that sort of mental shift. The block finally was released where it's like, oh no, like it's always going to be winter. You got to figure out some way to like enjoy and make the most of it. So that's it took me about 45 years to kind of get around to that, but I finally did have that epiphany.
It's a good place to be. I always appreciate the change of seasons. So we've got 100 degrees in the summer. So I actually really appreciate the cold and the wind when we get it. That's a good excuse to put on a coat. But all right, well let's jump in. So AccessOne, and I'm just going to read a bit about right off your website. So for those that want to understand a little bit about AccessOne, I'd love to dive in some more into the products you guys offer. You guys recently went through a rebrand and acquired a mobile payments company. So I want to get into that a bit too. So
Sure.
improving healthcare access one payment at a time. And AccessOne believes a successful balance of healthcare and payments is possible. No patient should avoid care or risk bankruptcy from healthcare costs. No health system or provider should go uncompensated for the world-class care they deliver. AccessOne supports the physical well-being of patients and the financial well-being of healthcare systems. We make collecting payments a breeze by focusing on empathetic patient terms, automation, digitization, and intuitive patient communication channels. So clearly you support a dual-sided market, consumers who are in need of or have had healthcare, and then healthcare systems. And when you and I had met a few years ago and we did some work together on the rebrand for AccessOne, you had recently acquired a mobile payments company. So I would love to kind of hear from your perspective what AccessOne does, your market, and would love to unpack some of the products and services you guys offer, because I know you've evolved quite a bit the last couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, so I think fundamentally, um, AccessOne exists to help hospitals and health systems, large provider organizations, sort of deal with the growing problem that is collecting payments from patients. And, if you think about the trajectory of sort of healthcare payments, for the longest time, health systems didn't really have to care a whole lot about whether or not they collected payments from patients because they mostly got reimbursed from insurance companies. And if patients didn't pay their bills, it was a relatively small portion of their overall revenue. Um, but that has changed in the last 10 years, and there's a lot of macro um, sort of events and factors that have gone into that. But essentially, patients owe, they pay for healthcare twice, essentially, if you think about it, which is, and not just patients, we all do, which is, we pay to have healthcare insurance. If you're gainfully employed and you have employer sponsored care, you pay out of your paycheck. But then even when you go to the doctors, you're still paying for care after the fact because your insurance doesn't cover the whole thing. And insurance is very convoluted and it's hard to understand. Are you in network? Are you out of network? What's covered? What's not covered? So then you get the bill and it's sort of like, oh my gosh, I have a $3,000 bill um, or whatever. So AccessOne exists to make it easy for patients and frankly to afford their care and to live their best life without sort of that financial barrier. I think there's a lot of studies out there that patients don't get care because they're worried about the cost, they're worried about the affordability of it. And all of our tools and services and really kind of everything we do is through the lens of, how is this going to help health systems make it easy and less stressful for patients to pay their bills? And we have a kind of two main lines of business on how we do that. And they sort of serve, you know, different segments of that market, but ultimately they both really at their core are trying to make it easier and less stressful for patients to pay what they owe when they go to the doctor or the hospital.
Before AccessOne, were patients having to negotiate payment terms with hospitals?
Um, well, I suppose that is it depends, which I think is savvy patients. I think I would say by and large that patients don't and still don't nowadays, right? If they go in and get a knee surgery and they get that bill from the hospital for that knee surgery, I would say most patients are not negotiating that cost. They're not bothered to call up the hospital and kind of scrutinize the bill and look at every sort of line item charge and stuff like that. I would say more savvy patients can, and I would encourage patients to do that. In some ways, I think, because I do think, there's a lot of uh, look, Rory, how care is paid for in the US, whether it's through insurance or just patients paying their bills, it's very opaque. It's not still very not very transparent in 2025. And that's problematic because I think, we hear this time and time again from even people who work in hospitals and health systems, which is like healthcare is the only industry where you don't actually know how much you owe before you go and buy the service. Like if you go and you want to get your oil change fixed, or you're buying something off of Amazon, or buying a car even, you can generally have a good sense of like knowing what you're going to pay, even if there's some negotiation on the back end and things like that. Most industries, you know what you're paying before you're buying it, and you can make a smart decision about the ROI, or you know, is this service worth the cost of it? Right? You make that trade off. Healthcare really is still the only one where you're like, how much is this thing going to cost me? Like, I don't know. Like, I need a gallbladder transplant or whatever. And you're like, I don't know how much this is going to cost me. And the price fluctuates. And if you go to the hospital down the street, it might be 30% less. And, and so there's just all this complication and unknown. Um, and I would say ultimately anxiety when it comes to just the cost of care. And so that's a real challenge for both patients and hospitals and health systems, because as patients owe more, right? You could kind of do the math in the back end, which is that like hospitals and health systems, the more that payment gets shifted to patients, the less revenue they end up making at the hospital and health system. And their margins are already tight. Like, I know that we're talking about, in some ways, multi-billion-dollar health systems, and so I know it's hard to have empathy in some ways, but those health systems, their margins are still like 0%, 1%. They are, having to be super efficient with a lot of the choices they make, and so every bit of revenue that they earn and keep in that health system helps that health system deliver more care, deliver, better services to the patients they serve. And so the problem of that, AccessOne is trying to solve for and help with, the problem of just patient payments, self-pay, is I think it's become a really interesting one. And it's a vital one in some ways.
Well, I think so many of us have, well, at least by the time you reach my age, and I think I'm going to give you some grace. You're a bit way behind me, but you have children, and, things come up, things happen. And then you learn about, as we get older, we learn about what a deductible means and what premiums mean. And you find out that, that bit of care that you may need ends up costing you a lot more out of pocket, tens of thousands of dollars. I've experienced that firsthand with my son and his sport, motocross, and being injured, and then discovering, despite the fact that we pay several $1,000s a month into the system, our deductibles were a little higher. And so I've learned the hard way that when you need care, that copay is just the start oftentimes. And it's unfortunate, but I can see there's a tremendous amount of value from my exposure to AccessOne and the work that you guys have done. And as you move from, a few years ago, as probably recognizing the space a little bit more of a traditional payments company to a fintech, into having a mobile payment solution, providing consumers an option. And that option is readily available in the palm of their hand, to be able to at least think from a cash flow perspective, how am I going to meet my obligation here? Because I can't write a check for $10,000 today, but I need the care, or I got the care, and now I'm strapped. So I see a lot of value in that
Well,
alone, and alleviating some anxiety.
yeah, and like patients shouldn't have to make that trade-off. People shouldn't have to, I mean, we say patients, but really people in the United States shouldn't have to make that trade-off between deciding, like, if you go in and you get care and you're have, like, right now we're recording this in February, that's like peak deductible season, right? Like, deductibles reset for patients in January. And if you've got a $3, $4, $5,000 deductible, you've got to you have to spend that much in care before you essentially even get any benefit of health insurance if you're on a high deductible plan. And so if you go get care, well, if you walk out with a $3,000 bill, most people cannot just they don't have that money sitting in a emergency fund, waiting to be spent. You know, God bless you if you do. You're better off than most. And so now, your choices are excruciating. If you're a family, it's like I have to put that bill on a credit card. Well, the interest rate on that credit card is 28%. And so now, you've paid it off, but now you got to pay the credit card company back. And it's like, that's at 28%. If you can't pay that, you just get further into debt. And so what AccessOne says is like, no, no patient should go into debt or feel that sort of stressful burden of, not getting the care they need in order to pay their bills. So yeah, our programs are designed for, to enable families to pay that $3,000 like 0% interest over 12 months, 24 months, whatever they need. So that, they're not making those hard choices of, do I want to pay my heat in the winter or pay for my knee replacement? Do I want to put groceries on my table for my kids this month or, pay for their diabetes treatment? Right. And so what we're saying is that people should not have to make those gut wrenching choices. And at the same time, health systems shouldn't lose that money that they're owed to keep their doors open. And so we're kind of bridging that gap between, we call it the affordability gap. And it's really kind of what hospitals and health systems are losing out on and what patients are not able to afford. And we're trying to kind of close that gap for our partners in the industry. And so we're a very mission driven organization. And it's, I think, a hugely important one. I wish that, the cost of care and how care is paid for was talked about more in the US. And that's kind of why I love working for AccessOne. I think I feel like a sense of stewardship almost, right? It's like the work that we're doing is important, but also trying to make that relevant and seem important, because oftentimes it can be, as complicated and complex, and it's like hard to kind of wrap your head around sometimes. So yeah, all of us here feel deeply honored to sort of, how do we take that sort of deeply important work that we're doing and make it simple and relevant for the different audiences that we serve.
Yeah, what is the experience like, the introduction of AccessOne? Let's just play an example. I have to go to the hospital or get some care, and then you go to check out, the bill is due. Here's the result of what just happened. Is it is it a downloading of the app? Like, what does that experience look like for the consumer, and how does the partner hospital work within that relationship too?
Yeah, and it's slightly different depending on the product. So if it's mobile pay, um, oftentimes those customers, those patients, they sort of just get a text that's like, "Hey, your bill from General Hospital is due," and then they kind of click the link and they can open it up and they can see their bill and sort of just pay right from the interface, credit card on file or whatever. It's super super easy and very frictionless. And that's kind of this really interesting thing, because the product is almost so good that it requires very little education or but the biggest thing we have to do is the health system. We help the health system educate the patient that, like, if they see this text, it's not a spam, right? It's sort of like overcoming that. Like, this is not a phishing thing. This is like, actually your bill is going to get it through text message. On the patient financing side, we have signs and brochures. A lot of it is in the waiting room or that front desk, right? So like educating at the line of like where patient that front line of where patients are, giving them a kind of brochure to take home. Hey, if you're worried about affording this care, like our partner is AccessOne, and then it's sort of like they sign up on our patient portal and they go to the website and things like that. Call our it's called a PAC, but it's the Patient Advocacy Center. It's basically like our call center. Um, and so there's a bunch of different ways that they can interact with us, but essentially it's helping our health system partners sort of educate, like, hey, if your patients are worried about paying, like you need to like let them know about AccessOne, and we give them a whole bunch of resources and things to help the patient kind of interact with us. We also have like integrations with, I'm sure probably everyone has interacted with like Epic and MyChart. Probably if you're in the health system, if you've ever gone to a hospital. And so a lot of our customers use that, and we sort of interact right within that as well. So like if you go in MyChart to pay your bill, oftentimes it's like, hey, need help? Like we work with AccessOne, and they can kind of click over and like activate from Epic and things like that. So we do have like other integration touch points like that. Um, and what we try to do is sort of like those first principles of like, okay, how is your patient interacting with your billing system? And then like we want to be sort of everywhere that those touch points are that you have with your patient, so that they know who AccessOne is and how we can help them um, pay for their care if they can't pay for it in full.
So is the experience different for hospital networks and how they work versus say are you working all the way down to individual offices or practitioners as well?
We own well, so the answer is yes, but and so we only for our patient financing programs, we only sell to larger hospitals and health systems. So, our addressable market, I could get really, really kind of wonky on this, but it's like I think it's sort of like a billion in patient revenue and multiple hospitals, so it's like we have a very tight addressable market of health systems, but within those health systems, right, it's like they own multiple hospitals, they own you know physician practices, they own urgent cares, and because we work at the health system level, our products do trickle down to all of the different practices and entities that they own. So yeah, we are in the individual doctor office, but we're not like selling to the individual doctor office. We're selling to that sort of health system level.
And I must imagine that the sales cycles are fairly long. I'm curious about, as a VP of marketing, leading the marketing strategy for the business, like what does the marketing look like to engage those hospital networks? And then I could imagine the sales cycle is long, and then the actual onboarding and integration takes some time too.
Well, yeah, the great thing is integration and onboarding is actually fairly not as long as you would think. I think our integration team, we have our VP of onboarding. She's amazing. I think she started with AccessOne maybe about like a year and a half ago, and she's just done like tremendous work. I think we got our most recent patient financing customer live. It was like 3 months, 4 months. Like it was a very fast um, go live from like sign contract to go live. So we've got that process kind of like really dialed in. The sales process, yeah, it's long. I think I typically say it's probably like a 15 to 18-month process. And that's on average. I think we've had some deals on the shorter side, 10 months to 12 months, probably some longer, 2 years in change. Yeah, it's very long, arduous slog for our salespeople. And so my hat's off to them, because I think, they're kind of the ones fighting that good fight kind of every day. Um and it's hard, because there's buying committees to evaluate buying committees. It's like in healthcare. Um, I always tell people, I've used this analogy before, but like if you're selling, let's say, to a academic medical center that's associated with, like, let's say, a state-run university, you might be selling to that hospital system, like our buyers called the vice president of revenue cycle management or the CFO. So you might kind of be selling to that person, but then because it's affiliated with a college institution, there might be a component of the buying committee that's actually attached to the academic university and not just the hospital. Because it's also state run, there also might then be like another entity behind the curtains that's attached to the state government because it's a state funded public university. So there's like, I think there's a lot of that when we know who our buyer is, but then sometimes that wider buying committee can be enormously complex and like convoluted. And I think
Hmm.
oftentimes then you're dealing with IT because it's like HIPAA and healthcare and all that stuff. So it's tough. I mean, our sales teams definitely have it tough for sure with our with how long and how convoluted some of these deals can be.
How are you marketing to healthcare systems now? And follow on question of that is, what's a primary reason why they're talking to Access One?
Yeah. So right now, so we definitely sort of take an account based marketing approach, and so fortunately for us, because we only sell to hospitals and health systems, and we only sell in the United States, I think there's probably at any given time, our addressable market is probably, I don't know, 400 accounts nationally, right? Like it's a big market, and there's a ton of opportunity. But like there's a lot of accounts that already have competitors, and we have our customer base and things like that. So it's a very defined market. So we definitely have sort of taken a much more account based approach. And we have tiers kind of within our addressable market where I spend my time or sales spends their time. We have different playbooks for okay, if we know there's a competitor at that account, we deal with that sort of, we have like the competitive playbook, versus if we think there's an opportunity where we have different stuff. So very trying to get tight alignment between sales and marketing and how we do stuff. But a lot of the activities that we run, it's would not surprise anyone. We're doing a lot of content led growth. I'd say I hate using that term, but my background is in content and as a reporter, and so I sort of lean heavily into that. So we do a lot of content, and that's everything from podcast, social, organic social, a monthly newsletter. I think we're not trying to use like email marketing. Our strategy is not to give people the hard sell and always kind of hammer them with our products. I think it's more like, how do we give value? I sort of always approach everything from the lens of, how do you give as much value as you possibly can in everything you do, in order to build relationships at scale, right? And so I think if you're always sort of asking like, here's our product, take a demo, come talk to sales, do this, like blah blah blah, I think like people kind of tend to tune that out, right? I think people just, they're like, I got bigger to deal with than buying your patient financing product. Like, I'm really sorry, but you're a small piece of my overall business. Um, so I try to very much like entertain, educate, not waste people's time, wherever we show up. Um, and so we have, a small sort of targeted paid, we're running targeted paid ads to the accounts that we're going after. We have different messages depending on which bucket they fall into. Um, and that's to soften it up. We're working with sales on, we do cold outreach, but that's sort of like marketing led, where I'm making those kind of cold emails from look like they're coming from sales, but they're kind of like automated at scale. But it's, again, that's sort of marketing. We have a podcast. We've leaned more heavily into YouTube this year. I think YouTube is kind of an untapped avenue for a lot of B2B marketing teams, especially in our space and revenue cycle. I've been really impressed with over the past years. We've sort of gotten more into it. That seems to be very promising. So for us, a lot of it is like educate, thought leadership, you know, trying to do content that's relevant to that buyer, to those accounts, things like that. It's not anything revolutionary or that different. But I think what we try to do is when we do stuff, we do try to show up and do it a little bit differently than say like other people in our industry. And I think that's kind of how we differentiate ourselves.
What would you say that when you think about the length of the sales cycle, are there things that you're doing that you've seen be effective in trying to increase the velocity of the sales process?
Well, we'll have to maybe schedule a follow-up call. So that's kind of my goals this year in 2025 is to figure out how to create better pipeline velocity. And that's, again, probably not surprising, but like everything from re-looking at um, how sales does discovery sessions, the demos, proposals that they deliver, um, all the stuff that they're doing. And so for me in 2025, that's definitely will be kind of that's on my kind of goals and to-do list this year is how do I kind of better work with sales at that sort of bottom of the funnel to kind of, it sounds dumb, but it's like, well, if we can we get deals from 18 to 15, from 15 to 12, if you do get it down a little bit, then it's like then sales can like pick up their velocity because now they're turning deals over a little bit quicker, but um, they can kind of probably put a little bit more on their plate. So yeah, we're looking at this year and I've just started to kind of dig into that.
Yeah, when we hear that often is particularly thinking about long sales cycles, it's how can you increase the velocity of the pipeline? And there's a number of different techniques that we use as marketers that you know of too, and but ultimately it requires, from my experience, a more holistic approach, and there is no silver bullet, and there's certain circumstances that might have different circumstances that might require longer sales cycles. It's just the way that it works. But because you have such a targeted audience that you're going after, a select set of competitors, certain value propositions and value that AccessOne offers, I could see where, as you go through this process, I'd love to have you back on and talk about how you do it. Um, so a
I'd
follow
love to
on.
pick your brain on that because I think what's so hard too, it's like you have to look at it's like, is your offer right? Is your pricing there's a lot of those sort of fundamental things where it's like, how do you get someone to because part of it is like that human psychology, like how do you get someone to actually just do something? And that's can be really hard to like get someone to just take action. Um,
Well, and often my experience has been, and I think it's consistent with the work that we did together for the years that we were able to rebrand AccessOne and do the work together, is marketing is held responsible often for the quality of the leads, which I think generally makes sense. But quality is measured in so many different ways, and in that whole prospect journey and experience, there's a lot of nuances to that, and you know understanding your market is one thing, and their particular circumstance and how you can help them be heroes in solving their problems. There's a lot of different ways you can unpack that from a marketing perspective, but a lot of it is an execution of sales, getting that defined well. And what is that experience from intro call to discovery to demo to proposal to contract? Like, Yeah, because I get asked that all the time. And the other question I was going to ask you that just came to mind is how does sales and marketing, how are you seeing you guys effectively working together? Because often they're viewed as two different sides of the business, where in my opinion, the most successful companies blend them together. They have to work well together to be most effective.
Yeah. I think we have a pretty small knit team here at Access One, so um, we have to work together. I think for us, it's look. I think at the end of the day, like marketing, if you're a sales led organization, if your bookings and revenue depends on sales closing deals, right? Like we're not product led growth. We're not a subscription service. We're not like Canva or like one of these things where just anybody can go put in their credit card and just sign up and get going. Like my job fundamentally is to make sales easier. And I do that through, yes, if I generate awareness for the company and brand awareness and differentiation, like, yes, that's one way to make things easier because people know who Access One is and they maybe might want to take our call, especially if they know us and love us as a brand. But then there's a million other things like throughout the sort of buying journey that make sales easier. And that could just be a more streamlined proposal. It could be a better, pitch deck. It could be a better discovery call. It could be, you know, doing things where they have more account intelligence and competitive intel and things like that. So there's a billion things that marketing is responsible for. It should be responsible for in order to make sales easier. So for me personally, in here at Access One, I think that's just like right now for us, it's like, okay, like I've told my sales counterparts, like if you've got your sort of bucket of 40 accounts that you're responsible for, like those are your tier one accounts that you are working, actively selling, trying to close. Like I will spend 60% of my time like helping you work those accounts. And I will do, right? It's like whatever you need, sales proposals, emails, anything that you need to be better, like I will do. If you need me to set up a local dinner event for you to get FaceTime, like we will do that. Like you just let us know. And, we have sort of our operating cadence where we're meeting every 2 weeks to kind of like review what's working and not working and what we know about the accounts and things like that. So there's that. And then there's, and then beyond that, there's like, I spend my rest of my time like, okay, here are the other accounts that I'm going to like soften up for you and try to get them to want to take a discovery and an assessment meeting with you. Um, and so we're trying to figure out what that operating rhythm is, but I think they know that I'm working to try to make their life easier however I can. And so I think, we're just trying to figure out that operating rhythm of how we work together, make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes and making things harder for one another. I mean, sometimes it's just really fundamentally comes down to like having the right communication rhythm, having the right, setup in Salesforce and things like that, where um, the lists are being pulled correctly and the data is there to kind of look and review um, and I think they'll hold me accountable if things aren't working well. I mean, I would expect them to, just like if they fumble a deal because they sent a email and they didn't run it by me, I'd be kind of upset about that too, because it's like, dude, I can help with that, like I can help make you sound smart, so like let me help you, earn that commission. So
Yeah, I
it's
guess
still a little bit of a work in progress, but I think, for me, it's like just being tightly aligned with our sales team to, um, for all of us to sort of be working together, and on the
yeah,
same page.
I couldn't agree more. There's in conversations I'm privileged to have many conversations with leaders of fintech and financial companies and every week, and it's not uncommon to have a sales driven leadership group that thinks of marketing in a different camp, and we're honestly all under the same umbrella. We're all trying to do good work, provide value to the market we serve our clients really, really well, build our brand, be authentic, and in the work that we do. And I think you said it really well, that what comes to mind for me is when there isn't an integrated strategy and not a holistic approach where everybody's on the same team rowing in the same direction. Some organizations, like the sales organization at AccessOne, an individual could go off the reservation and start writing their own emails and their own content and their own social posts, and it's not in line with the brand. It's not in tuned with the strategy, so it comes across as disingenuous, inauthentic at worst. But at best, it's inconsistent, and so that inconsistency and lack of cohesion creates a sense of distrust a little bit. And so that can affect the overall pipeline and the performance of sales in general and the whole organization if you're not careful. So keeping everybody together is really a big part of it.
Well, and I think like having really good SLAs and really good, um, like I'm very, we get, our like say inbound volume isn't a huge volume, but I'm also sort of not sending over to sales. I send over maybe one out of every 10 that comes in because it's like, this is not a good fit. This is not worth your time. So I'm like very protective about what I send to them to be like, hey, you should follow up with this. This seems promising. So even like little things like that, where it's like, no, if I send you something, know that I have like put the work in to make sure that this might be worth following up on. Like, I'm not just going to send you all the that comes in because I want to hit an arbitrary MQL number to make myself look good. It's like, I'm not going to do that. It's like, you guys got to know that if I send you something, it's like I've weeded out like the worst fit stuff to be protective of you and your time. So even things like that make a difference. And having agreements and different things, right? Like what counts as an opportunity, what counts as a lot of it is like operational challenges. It's like having like clearly defined stages, having SLAs in place, things like that. A lot of that just goes a long way to getting sort of that alignment and buy-in.
Yeah. Yeah, you had mentioned talking about content marketing, and you and I know the 95-5 rule. 95% of the market we're going after isn't in market for what we're selling. So content and thought leadership can be great ways to plant a positive memory with your market, even when they're not ready. So when they are ready, they know who you are. I'm curious how, tell us a little bit about RCM Ladder. Like, that's a super interesting niche podcast. For those that might not know what RCM means, maybe tell us a little bit about the podcast itself.
Yeah, sure. So our buyer is like we sell to in healthcare, it's kind of abbreviated. The acronym is RCM, and that stands for revenue cycle management. And if you think about revenue cycle in healthcare kind of grew out of medical billing. And right, so typically you have medical billers, but it sort of evolved into this thing called revenue cycle management. And they sort of oversee, I think, almost in some ways, everything that is like non-clinical in a hospital or health system. Like they are responsible for front desk scheduling, insurance verification, you know, kind of that full life cycle of like how a patient interacts from scheduling an appointment to paying their bill within the healthcare system. Um, and so we sell to the VP of RCM. Um, and so I was kind of like, okay, we had a podcast previously that was on the patient experience, and that was very much just geared towards like general awareness. Like, let's just get whoever we can get on the podcast. We'll, tap in. We'll talk about the patient experience as a topic, but that's broad enough that it fits into anything. So we recently sort of took a step back and was like, all right, well, what can we do for our actual buyer? And, there are some podcasts for like trade shows and things like that. Trade publications that have podcasts like the Beckers of the world. And, but they're all kind of boring and not that interesting. And, and and then, I was kind of like, well, what can we do that's a little bit different? And, I was kind of doing some research, and I was like, all right, there's a lot out there. If you work in revenue cycle, it's like you can find out, okay, like what metrics matter. Like there's a lot out there, information for them. But I was like, it's kind of interesting. Like one thing that's like not here is just, I don't know, like career development. Like it's pretty big. Like how do you go from being an entry level front desk person maybe to becoming a VP of rev cycle? Like what do you got to do to sort of advance your career? And there wasn't a whole lot specific to them, to that sort of person. So I sort of just pitched it as like, look, I think this is kind of different enough, right? It's an interview podcast. So within the structure of it being like an interview podcast, those all exist. But the topic is kind of different, and maybe we can kind of hang our hat on it and be different enough when we could kind of recruit and do that. So to me, it was a way to sort of differentiate what we were doing, from other vendors or other people. I think a lot of the podcasts are like, come talk to me about your health system and talk to me about whatever. And what I was like, my show, it's very much like, come talk to me about how you run one-on-ones with your direct reports, and do these kind of really kind of HBR type things. And so, yeah, a little bit different. We've done it. We've had about 12 episodes. We did like one season. I think it's been very well received. We put it on YouTube, Spotify, cut it up for social media. Um, I think we sort of proved the concept, that the concept is, people like it. And I think I'm very excited for season 2. We're in the process right now of recruiting for that. And I think, um, what's nice is we've sort of created this like engine, and now we're going to kind of layer on that sort of account based approach. So now the guests for season 2 are just going to be recruited from sort of our account based approach. So now we're kind of going to dial in and use it as a way to engage accounts and kind of help sales a little bit more. But I think it really kind of just gives a vehicle for our buyer to come on and talk about them and sort of their career journey and these great stories. And yeah, it's been awesome. I think I love kind of talking to people about that sort of stuff. And you just get these great stories, and yeah, it's been pretty wonderful so far.
Yeah, and there's so many stories behind the people that we work with every day that I think what you're doing is great, allowing those folks to tell their stories. And part of what I love with Mighty Finsights is the same. You get to meet the people behind some of the brands that we've heard of or maybe haven't heard of, but know the heart for the good work that they're doing. And I put you in that category. Like, you guys are doing some good things and in the healthcare payment space and making changes and improving experiences for hospital networks, obviously collecting more payments so they can stay in a good financial position, but two, for patients. Most of us have experienced something like that. So I think it's really meaningful. One last question is, what does the future look like for AccessOne? Like, what's next for you guys?
So I think for us, uh, it sounds kind of boring, but it's sort of like keep on, keep it on, right? We're, um, I think, continuing to grow as a company, offering, making improvements on the product. I think our product team has, and our product leader, kind of Marina Bigsby, has just done amazing work over the last like year and a half to, kind of build out that team and make it more SaaS like, where we're adding new features all the time and capabilities, and refining the product. So I think it's sort of supporting a lot of those launches. And then again, for marketing and sales, it's like just driving new business, right? It's like continuing to educate the market, continuing to build relationships, continuing to try to, um, get people to sort of see the value of what we do, and how we do it differently than our competitors. And sort of just like win business to help health systems and patients. So unfortunately it's not that sexy, but for us it's sort of like, I think, our CEO Mark, he's very, I think he was a former football player, maybe a collegiate football player, so he uses a lot of sports analogies. But I think for him, he said it's just that journey of like continuously getting better, right? It's like, how do you show up and get 1% better every day at everything you do? And so I think for me, like that's kind of my mentality as well, is like, how do I show up and be a 1% better marketer, a 1% better teammate and coworker for my go-to-market, coworkers. And I think as a company, that's just kind of what we're doing. We're trying to get, 1% better every day to help patients and hospitals and health systems.
No, that's great. For those who might want to learn more about AccessOne or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
So, for AccessOne, you can just go to our website, accessonepay.com, you know, um, and then, for me, probably LinkedIn. But if you Google me, I mean, I'm run a bunch of podcasts. You can probably find our stuff on YouTube, a lot of our videos, Spotify, things like that. But I would say LinkedIn for sure.
Great.
James Furbush, just kind of look me up, and I
Yeah,
always
yeah, and we'll
connect.
put that on the show notes too,
Yeah.
just so folks can find it.
Yeah.
Well, James, this has been great. So good to connect with you again. And thank you so much for the information and sharing so much about AccessOne. And please keep us posted.
Oh my God, Rory, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. I hope this was useful for your listeners. So it was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, don't forget to hit subscribe. And if you'd like to learn more about Customer and the work we're doing building financial and fintech brands and businesses, please visit our website, customer.com. That's CSTMR.com. Or you can find us interacting with clients and sharing insights on LinkedIn. All of these links will be in the show notes.